Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I'm afraid I will repeat many things which have been said by my previous speakers, and even in the morning session where we talked about behavior, continuous improvement, benchmarking and other things. And I'm going to, I think, touch on these issues during my presentation. So I'm responsible at the OECD, which is an international organization which basically tries to improve policies. We have our motto, which is better policies for better lives, puts again people in the center. And I'm responsible for the headquarters and the locations which we have around the world. We have 36 member countries and collaborate with about 70 other partner countries. So you can imagine that this requires a certain support in terms of infrastructure and support. Again, talking about people, the OECD has been measuring performance for a long time based on indicators like the GDP, an indicator which was used for a long, long time. Today we use other indicators, and we have something which is, for example, a better life index. It's not a sustainability index, but a better life index. And sustainability and environmental concerns and health and other concerns come in directly into this index. So I've said who we are. We have a global reach. We are trying to go towards better lives. You can look us up on the internet and find out more about our work. We are working with governments, parliamentarians, and other international organizations, but also the civil society. I always say that I'm responsible for the things that basically are being discussed when they go wrong. That's my responsibility, and I think that's probably the case of many of you as well. The OECD, about 10 years ago, I'd say under my leadership, started to look at sustainability in a more structured way. The first thing we said to ourselves is if we want to manage our buildings and not only the buildings but also our services in a sustainable manner, we need to be able to actually measure this. So we decided, because you cannot manage without measuring, so we decided to use the GHG protocol to actually do a carbon inventory, which helped us to actually set up a baseline, a starting point in this endeavor. We then said, now how should we go about this again in a structured way to actually improve certain things? Certain areas are certainly more easy to improve than others. Give you the example, we have a population which travels a lot. Obviously our carbon footprint is very much influenced by travel, but I have, as a facilities manager, no handle on the travel of the different individuals who go around the world. I have to just support this travel. Where I have a direct handle is actually the buildings and the services which I provide in these buildings. And that's why we actually used a common framework, a French common framework, the HQE, which is on the slide there, which is actually a voluntary sustainable buildings certification process. And this process, just to give you an idea of sort of its impact, has allowed us between 2010 and 2018 to reduce our carbon footprint of buildings only, not of the full scope of the responsibility I'm talking about, by 55%, measuring this inside the framework all the time. Over the same time, the overall emissions per staff reduced by 14%, which doesn't sound a lot, but it's quite significant. Now, you will see this slide, the development goals, the UN development goals, sustainable development goals were mentioned by the speaker before. You saw them on the slide before as well. We are getting inspired, obviously, by a number of things, and these sustainable development goals are also a guideline for us, besides the guidelines which we, as an organization, publish, and where we encourage actually our members and other countries to apply good practices in environmental management and use actually environmental aspects for economic growth. There are a number of initiatives which are driven by the organization in this sense. This is another reason why we thought it would be absolutely indispensable for us to lead the way in sustainable buildings and trying to improve our environmental performance. So this slide just shows the different domains in which we are actually operating inside the organization. I'm just going to do a little short focus on commuting and procurement. Well, the commute is obviously one of the very difficult aspects in any office environment. I'm talking about classical office environments where you have people who go back and forth on a daily basis. This may actually change over time with, teleworking and other new ways of actually providing or carrying out the work. The question I'm asking myself, and we are asking ourselves, besides the services which we have to provide in terms of the actual infrastructure next to our buildings, how do we actually interact with the urban environment in which we operate our buildings? And how do we integrate also certain initiatives? A lot of our buildings, again, are in Paris. The city of Paris has an initiative which is to actually ask companies, large companies, to come up with a transport plan, and how do you actually integrate into such initiatives from a company, or in our case organizational point of view. So this interface, I think, is quite interesting to look at. Just an example on this is work from the OECD, from the International Transport Forum. If we would actually get to different types of transportation, shared taxis, taxi buses, and things like that, we could, in this case, the state's case study was basically on Lisbon, Auckland, and one other city. For Lisbon, it was this slide, which I thought was very telling. So we are also looking, for example, on how we can facilitate the transport of our staff, not only between buildings, but probably also between their homes and the OECD in different ways. The other focus I mentioned, and I wanted to go about very quickly, is green procurement. Again, the OECD promotes green procurement because it actually can help really to motivate governments to make a contribution towards sustainability goals. Purchasing power to choose goods, services, and so forth is important. So in the OECD, for example, we have incorporated in all our tendering processes and all our purchasing processes environmental criteria as an important aspect. Now, is this enough? There was a lot of talk about sort of people's skills, and I'm going to come back to skills later on. We actually at some stage decided that we needed to have a function in our organization, which is the function of an environmental coordinator. It goes back to the skill sets which facilities management needs to dispose of. We obviously have traditional facilities manager roles, but this new role, in my opinion, has made a big difference, not only in the sense of the type of qualifications that the person brings in or the role brings in, but also the types of work that this role fulfills. There's one part which has to do with policy, development of an environmental policy. There is another one which has to do with environmental management systems. You have facilities management systems, but you need an environmental management system. And then, last but not least, there is the importance of actually communication. Now, another facet of this very multifaceted theme has to do with habits and behavior. Habits and behavior. This morning we talked about behavior for some in one of the presentations. We are very much interested and we are trying to look as closely as possible at how our staff, the people who work at the OECD actually use facilities. And we have used, again with the help of behavioral science, we have made a number of experimentations, for example, to see how people use the dial on the air conditioning system to actually set the right temperature by sort of monitoring over a period of time with different configurations the impact of changes which we introduced onto these dials. The result, in a nutshell, was that it's not necessarily the temperature which guides the people, but it's sometimes the number on the dial which is more important. In terms of habits in the use of buildings, I think there's another aspect which is important. We talk a lot about well-being. Well-being goes much beyond what we probably had to provide before, comfort and ergonomics and probably certain services like catering services. Well-being goes really beyond that and requires from the facilities managers a different approach, a different understanding of what our clients actually expect. There are new service offerings. David talked about sort of the circular economy or sharing economy. That's something as well. We have to deal today with a different way of how people actually and different expectations of the people for which we actually provide all these services and furnish facilities management. The workplace concepts, I will not dive into this very much, but again here as well we have to look at this from a facilities management point of view in a different way. It's not, we are not dealing today with the 9 to 6 collaborator who comes in the morning and leaves at night. There's a whole spectrum of services which are expected today, and the use of the buildings in this sense or in this context of sustainability is also important. I do not want to have buildings which have lots of areas which are not used on a continuous basis. So this requires a good deal of reflection and a good deal of investment and involvement, I would say. Just a few final words. I think I have another minute. I think what is really important is that we recognize the societal change which happens today in order to plan for the future. We need to, and this was also said by many speakers, we need to involve all stakeholders. There are different stakeholders which are evident, like the HR people and the IT people, but it's the clients themselves, it's the social partners which need to be involved. The management, The previous speaker said we are not in the boardroom. Yes, I think we have to use this term. We have to get the discussion from the boiler room to the boardroom, and that is something which requires communication. We have to drive innovation, embrace technology. There was a good deal said about technology, and then in the end we have to attract new skills, and that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges which I, in a daily operational manner, experience, to find the right people with the right skills, not necessarily the right technical skills, but the right skills. The combination of technical and human skills is very, very difficult. I said, let's talk about this in 10 years again. I don't think there will nothing will be happening in the next 10 years. There will be a lot that is going to happen. I only came to facilities management, only quotation marks, 10 years ago. And I'm coming from IT actually, but I think that these processes will significantly accelerate, and I think there's a lot to be said and to be observed over the next 10 years. Thank you very much, and I think I'm perfectly on time.